Hey everyone, how are you doing? I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader, and I have that thing lately where I've been waking up quite early in the mornings, and this is great because it means I've been getting a lot of reading done, but it also means I'm really tired a lot of the time, and so I know it's a thing for people to like show off the tea that they're drinking on BookTube, but I really need this. I really need the caffeine, and also I was up late last night chatting with Matthew Sharapa, so if I seem really tired today, you know, like you can blame Matthew Sharapa. I mean, don't really, because it's actually my fault. I was the one that was pushing and saying like, yeah, let's chat. Is like, because it was really fun. But yeah, it means that I'm a bit tired today. But I want to make a book haul video talking about books that I'm really excited about reading and ones that I'm hoping to get to a lot more quickly because I've been waking up early, so I have more time to read. So the first book I want to talk about is one that I actually bought at an art exhibit recently. I went to an exhibit of the artwork of Dorothea Tanning. There was a retrospective of her life's work at the Tate Modern recently, and it was an amazing exhibit. I didn't really know much about her before going to this exhibit, but she's such a fascinating person, and she's one of these people that now I'm totally entranced by her life and want to know more about her, because she was a surrealist artist and sort of in the early to mid 20th century, she was producing these works of surrealist art, which were hyper realistic in detail, but the actual scene she was depicting was completely absurd and odd and gothic and weird, and but throughout her life, her art really changed, and she had a very long life. I think she lived to be 105 or something like that. And she was married to the artist Max Ernst, and so she had this long, fascinating life of which her art really evolved over the course of it. But one of her big inspirations for her art was literature, and she was really interested in Gothic literature, and also the Portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And so she had all these influences of literature, and you can see some of them, like she had this soft sculpture named Emma, named after Emma Bovary. And so, but what's really interesting was later in her life, very late in her life, she started writing more, and she published some poetry and a memoir, I think, and she also produced her only novel, which is called Chasm. And this was published, get this was published when she was 94 years old. She only started writing and publishing when she was 94 years old. Isn't that amazing? And so, like, literature was always part of her life, but yeah, she only started producing work later in her life. And so, yeah, this is a very slim book, and the premise of it sounds quite crazy. It takes place in a mansion in a desert over a weekend where a group of people get together, and this mansion was built by a madman, and so the feeling and sensibility of that man permeates through this mansion, and this group of friends get together for these life-changing alterations. And it also involves a girl who leads them out into the desert, and yeah, it sounds very surreal and strange, but I'm completely fascinated to try to read this now. This week is also Independent Bookshop Week in the UK, which was started by an organization called Books Are My Bag that encourages people to go out to their local bookshop and buy a book, and I don't need an excuse to do that, but I'm happy to have an excuse. So I went to one of my favorite independent bookshops in London, which is Gaze the Word in Bloomsbury, and I bought a copy of this poetry collection called Sergius Seeks Bacchus by Norman Erikson Pasaribu. And this is poetry which ruminates on what it means to be a minority in terms of your ethnicity and sexuality and religion. And yeah, I've heard really good things about this, so I'm quite excited to read this. A novel which I'm reading right now, and which was published a couple of weeks ago, is called This Brutal House by Niven Govinden. And I've read a couple of Niven's books before. He's a really powerful writer, and this novel is fascinating, and just I'm totally gripped by it. It's the story of a group of mothers from drag houses in New York City, and the children of these drag houses have gone missing over the years, but the state and society in general just doesn't care that they've gone missing, and these mothers have had enough, and so they form a silent protest where they go and lie outside of City Hall to make a statement, and it's told in their collective voice, so it describes their experience as we. And yeah, it's just so, his writing is so precise and powerful, and I'm really enjoying it. And Andrew McMillan, there's quotes on it from all the cool writers at the moment. Andrew McMillan, who's a poet, he says it's a vital book, and Olivia Lane, she says Niven Govinden is a true force of fierceness and beauty, and I totally agree. Rules for Visiting by Jessica Frances Kane. And this is a novel which is quite interesting because just reading the premise of it, I think it doesn't sound all that interesting. The premise is it's a woman who works as a gardener at a university, and her job is going very well, but she feels like her life is becoming too narrow in focus and too routine, and so she goes to seek out these people that she used to be really connected with, and she goes to visit a number of different people, and so I mean that doesn't sound like the most exciting premise, but I've heard such good things about this book, and it's already starting to appear on some of the best books of the year so far lists. And it also has some quotes on it from authors that I really like Emily St. John Mandel and Madeline Miller, who says it's engaging and compassionate. And also there's a quote from Alexander Chi on the back of it, and Alexander Chi is a great writer, and he says there's a wonderful riches here in every sentence. So yeah, I'm very eager to read this. Next is a reprint of a classic gay novel, and it actually comes in it has two different covers on it, and it's Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Holleran. So it comes in these two editions, and you can see they were going for a slightly different vibe in the two different editions, so you can pick which one you like better. But this is a classic novel, and so I mean it's Pride Month as well, and so a number of the books I'm talking about are by gay authors, and so yeah, this is a classic gay novel that I've always wanted to read, and I don't know why I've never got around to it. So I think it was first published in 1978, and it concerns the story of two men who moved to New York City and then discovered their gay lifestyle that they didn't have access to where they initially grew up. And yeah, I've just always wanted to read this, and so I don't know which edition I'm going to pick, but I don't know, which one would you pick? My Past is a Foreign Country by Zeba Talkhani, and this is a memoir I am so excited to read. It has a really beautiful, striking cover as well. So Zeba Talkhani, and she grew up in Saudi Arabia under a very patriarchal society, and so this she recounts her process traveling to a number of different countries and finding her own independent voice as a Muslim feminist woman. And yeah, so I'm so excited to read her story. The 10 Loves of Mr. Nishino by Hiromi Kawakami. And this is a novel about a man who, over the course of his life, fell in love again and again, and it's his story told through the different people that he fell in love with. And so I think that's really interesting to get the perspective on an individual's life from all of the people who are most important to him over the course of his life. The Other Mother by Matthew Green, and this is a novel about a 13-year-old boy who is dealing with a lot in his life because his father died and his mother remarried. And he wakes up one morning to find that his mother has been replaced by an exact duplicate of her. And yeah, so that's a really intriguing premise. The Van Apfel Girls Are Gone by Felicity McLean. And this is a novel, this is a thriller, and I don't often read all that many thrillers, but I think it's a sort of literary thriller. And it's about a young girl who, over the course of one summer, a group of sisters that she goes to school with all disappear during that summer, and they're never heard from again. And then later in her life, she's thinking back on this time and reflecting on it, and she wonders what happened to them, and she sort of investigates what happened to them. And I was really drawn to reading this because there's a quote on the back from Fiona Mosley, who wrote the great novel Elmet, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. So all of you fans of Elmet, take note of this. And she calls it a smart, classy thriller that blazes with the heat of Australia and slowly reveals its many layers. The Rapture by Claire McGlasson. This has a really striking cover, and this is a novel which is based on sort of a true story of a small religious cult in the UK, and I think it takes place in a post-war period. So it's these people who are driven by this religious ferocity in the wake of a lot of deprivation and loss. And it tells the story of a few different women, I think, involved in this extreme organization, which are sort of predicting the end of the world. And I think it sounds like a really striking novel. The Atlas of Reds and Blues by Devi S. Laskar. I think this novel has been making a big splash in the US, and it's just been published in the UK with this really striking cover. And so it's the story of a American-born woman of Bengali descent, and her home is targeted for a police raid for prejudiced reasons. And it's the story of how she's shot and lying in her driveway, and she's recounting her story of her life and her experiences while lying in this state. Leading Men by Christopher Castellani. This is a novel I'm really excited about because it reimagines the story of Tennessee Williams and his lover Frank Merlo in Europe in the 1950s, and how they discover there an actress who gets involved in Tennessee Williams' plays. And so it recounts the story of their relationship and their involvement with this actress. And I think it just sounds like such a great subject matter I'm really drawn to. It also has blurbs from authors I really like. I always really go on blurbs of authors that I really like and trust that. So Lauren Groff says it's an extraordinary book, and Garth Greenwell says it's a novel of rare insight and beauty. You Would Have Missed Me by Birgit Vanderbeke. This is a novel which has just been translated into English from the German. And I read one of Birgit Vanderbeek's novels before called The Muscle Feast, which is really powerful. And this is the story of a girl who, I think she's only 7 years old, and she travels from East Germany to West Germany, and she's living there in a refugee camp under very strained circumstances because her parents sort of neglect her, and so it's her story. She's a really powerful writer. I think she's a favorite writer of Britta Bowler's, I've been eager to read more of her work, so I'm glad more of it's been translated. Vivian by Christina Hesselvold, and this is a novel I'm really excited about. I always sound like overexcited about so many books, but I honestly am really excited about it by the subject matter because, I love novels that are based on the lives of real people. And this novel is based on the life of Vivian Maier, who is such a fascinating individual. If you don't know, Vivian Maier was a photographer who worked as a nanny throughout her life, but she took thousands and thousands of pictures, a lot of street photography in the mainly in the city of Chicago, but also New York City, and also I think Los Angeles. And I went to an exhibit of her photographs before, and it's really fascinating how she became a famous photographer as well, because she took all these thousands of photos throughout her life, but she never got them exhibited or tried to publish them. She just took them, and they were stuck in all these boxes, and then after she died, all of these photographs were auctioned off, and somebody bought them on a whim and then discovered how fascinating and beautiful they were. Her sense of perspective was so interesting, and just she made these absolutely beautiful photographs. And now she's acknowledged as one of the most important photographers of the late 20th century. But during her lifetime, she had never published them or sought any fame as an artist. And so it's really interesting wondering why she didn't. It was obviously very important to her to do this, and so it's fascinating wondering why she never sought any recognition or tried to have her photographs published. And so, so this reimagines her life and her story and why that might have happened. Selfies by Sylvie Wheel. And coincidentally, this has a connection to the book I just talked about because it's a book that examines the tradition of selfies. And, we think of selfies as a modern phenomenon that people take with their camera phones. But she talks about the tradition of how artists took selfies in the past, whether it was through self-portraiture or taking photographs of themselves. And you can see one of the people she talks about is Vivian Maier. And you can see on the photograph on the cover of this book is a self-portrait of Vivian Maier. But she also brings into it her own life and talks about her own experience. So it's also a self-portrait of her own life, as well as talking about this tradition of selfies. So isn't that fascinating? Askar and Zara by Samir Rahim. This is a debut novel about two different British Muslim individuals who come from very different families, who have very different perspectives on life and ways of being. And it recounts their marriage day and how they discover that the image they have of each other doesn't live up to the reality of each other. So that sounds like a really compelling story. On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is a novel which has been getting a lot of hype. It's his debut novel, but he's a poet, and I read his poetry collection earlier this year in anticipation of this novel. And it also has one of the most beautiful covers. A lot of people have been talking about this. But it tells the story of a boy writing a letter to his mother and sort of recounting and reflecting on their life moving from Vietnam to America. And Matthew, speaking of Matthew Sharapa, he made a whole video about this where he took a really smart perspective, I thought, where he just focused on 5 elements of the book that he thought were really extraordinary, rather than just giving an overall view of the book and the story of it. And I'll link that below because I thought that was a really interesting perspective that he took. But this is one of my most anticipated books of the year. Nightboat to Tangier by Kevin Barry. This is an Irish author that I think is really exciting. I read his previous novel, Beetlebone. He's written a number of books, but I've only read his previous book, and I loved that novel. And this is a novel about 2 gangsters who are sitting in a Spanish port waiting for a boat to arrive from Tangier, and so it's about their relationship and their life as gangsters, and somebody's gone missing, and so I think it's a really thrilling story, but also he's such a unique writer in the way that he writes. It's a story that I wouldn't normally be interested. I'm just not that interested in gangsters, but because it's written by him, I'm really excited to read this. The Death of Baseball by Orlando Ortega Medina, and this is a novel of 2 young men who come together. One of them believes that he's a reincarnation of Marilyn Monroe because he's born immediately after her death. And another young man who believes that he has a particular destiny in life. And they come together to make a film about these beliefs that they have about their destinies in life and the idea of the transmission of souls into other bodies. Really unique premise. The Sun on My Head by Giovanni Martins. This is a short novel which is set in Brazil in the slum community and recounts the story of a group of boys who live in this slum community and their various struggles with the drug lords who sort of rule these communities and their experiences with racism. And this comes with a blurb on it from DBC Pierre, who won the Booker Prize a number of years ago. And he says that every so often a writer blasts a hole through a wall. Giovanni Martins is that writer. The Sun on My Head is a blaze of heat, love, and risk that will leave you reeling. Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh. This is a writer who's really well respected and has written a number of books before, but I've never read him and I've always wanted to. So this is a novel about a rare book dealer, and immediately I'm like, ooh, a novel about a rare book dealer. But it's about his experiences going out of his own enclosed community and discovering more about the world and traveling to a number of places rather than just reading about it in books. The Mating Habits of Stags by Ray Robinson, and I really really love the simple beauty of this cover. I think it's really well done and really elegant. And it's the story of a man who is in his 70s, living in North Yorkshire in the moors. And he's a widower, and he finds himself reflecting on his life and becoming obsessed by these ideas of revenge. And these ideas of revenge push him to commit an act of violence, which his friend discovers. And so it's about the confrontation between them of him being held accountable for his actions. So it sounds like a really powerful story. So those are all the books I want to talk about. A lot of books that I have to read. You guys, I'm going to have to be waking up at like 2 a.m. in the morning to read all of these books. But yeah, they're ones I'm really excited to read. So let me know which ones you think sound most interesting, which ones you're most intrigued to read now, or if you've read any of these, what you think of them. And I'll speak to you again soon. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're getting enough sleep. And take care, everyone.